Welcome back to True Crime and Tea, or welcome to True Crime and Tea, where we spill more than tea. Every episode we dive into the darkest corners of humanity, peeling back the layers of twisted minds, chilling motives and unspeakable acts. From killers who wore masks of charm to crimes that shook the world. Grab your tea, get cozy and brace yourself, because this is true crime with a critical twist. And today's one is heavy. It's about masks, the ones we wear around the world and the ones that crack when nobody's watching. Grab your tea and let's talk. Now, these are true crime cases, so some of the topics that we talk about are very sensitive. This one in particular is talking about child mortality, so disclaimers all around. If you feel this is not something that you can stick with, there are videos that you can watch. Hate to say goodbye, but we understand. In October 1994, a young mother stood before the nation, tearful, broken, begging for the safe return of her boys. But behind this televised plea was a lie. It was a lie so devastating that it shook the foundations of maternal trust. Susan Smith had not lost her boys, she had unalived them. Susan Lee Vaughn Smith was born on September the 26th, 1971 in South Carolina. She was not unfamiliar to tragedy. Her father died by sending himself off of this earth when she was just 6 years old. And then at 13, Susan attempted to unalive herself also. And these aren't isolated cases. This happened more than once. There were signs of long-standing emotional instability and trauma, and this would echo throughout her adult life. We see these kind of themes repeating themselves in her adult life. Her home life was troubled after her mother remarried. She was essayed by her stepfather, who was called Beverly Russell, and he was a man with local prominence, so he was well known in their town, both in business and conservative Christian circles. A lot of these cases with fanatics seem to be linked to some form of religious extremism. Not saying that he was an extremist, but there seems to be a link there. Their inappropriate relationship was reportedly continued into Susan's adulthood. So where it may have started off as SA, she may have then convinced herself that she felt a certain type of way for him, and then it became more of a grooming situation. And it wasn't just a scandal at the time, it was deeply and is deeply disturbing. So after high school, Susan made another attempt to unalive herself, and this was after a failed relationship with a married man, and it seems like emotional dependency became a recurrent theme in her life, and she eventually married a man named David Smith. The couple had two sons, Michael, who was aged 3, and Alexander, who was aged just 14 months at the time of the incident. But the marriage was quite rocky, and it was filled with infidelity on both sides. So not just from him and not just from her. They were both just living free with other people. On October the 25th, 1994, Susan called the police claiming that a black man had carjacked her vehicle with the boys still strapped in their car seats. For 9 days, she cried on national television, holding stuffed animals, pleading for her children's return. But behind the scenes, the investigators were actually quite suspicious of her already. Just under scrutiny, what they had claimed was that under scrutiny, some of the things that she had said, some of the evidence that she had presented just didn't really hold up. It didn't really make much sense, particularly a red traffic light that she claimed was what forced her to stop at an intersection, at an empty intersection. Technically, what was found, the light wouldn't have turned red without another car present, a detail that was later unraveled in her story. On November the 3rd, so a good few days after the boys had gone missing, she confessed that she had let the car roll into John D. Long Lake with her sons still inside. And her reason for this, she wanted to start a new life with a man named Tom Finley. We know she's got some attachment issues there, but this is a bit, this just takes the biscuit. So Tom Finley was a man who had just broken up with her because he didn't want children. So her answer to that was, okay, I'll get rid of my children and then you'll want me. Susan's sons, it seems, they stood in the way of the fantasy that she had imagined for herself. Whenever I read cases where someone's done something for a man in particular, like they've harmed their child, they've unalived their child because of a man, it's very, very challenging to look at it objectively. And I'm gonna preempt the academic portion of this when I say it's really, really challenging to look at topics like these objectively when you know that the intent behind the case was something that's just so illogical. But yeah, so the trial and the public backlash. So Susan Smith's trial was a media frenzy. Prosecutors argued that she unalived her sons to remove an obstacle to her romantic ambitions. Her defense attorney, however, painted a picture of a woman crippled by depression, trauma, and desperation. Not evil, but lost. Yeah. Psychiatric assessments diagnosed her with major depressive disorder and dependent personality disorder. That's the emotional attachment creeping in there. Her attorney said that it wasn't just an unaliving with malice, it was a mother's failed self-unaliving attempt, but the jury didn't agree. So essentially they were arguing that she didn't really mean to get rid of her children, she really wanted to get rid of herself, but they were just collateral damage, even though it's quite clear that she had done this because the man said he didn't want children and she wanted to, like they said, remove the obstacles which were unfortunately her children. But the jury didn't agree, just like most of us right now are not agreeing with this facade. And after just 2.5 hours, she was found guilty of 2 counts of unaliving, and she received 2 concurrent life sentences but avoided the death penalty. I always find that interesting when it's cases like this, how they justify not giving the death penalty. And I personally don't agree with the death penalty. I feel like it doesn't, taking a life for taking a life. I know that the scripture says a life for a life, but I feel like, how do you put yourself on a pedestal to then be the executioner? It just doesn't make sense to me personally. However, in cases like this where the death penalty is on the table, I don't understand how the jury come to a conclusion so quickly as well and don't give the death penalty. There's so many different factors in this as well that would push one to think that it would be almost easier and justified in so many ways to give them the death penalty, because there's so many different factors contributing to what she did being outrageous and just deserving of death. But yeah, in prison she continued to claim that she's not the monster society, her words, "I'm not the monster society thinks I am." And then in a written letter in 2015, a letter to a journalist, she said the narrative that she unalived her children for a man was so far from the truth. She insisted that she felt she wanted to unalive herself and mentally unwell and not calculating, just broken. That's what she said. But public sympathy had long since evaporated. The once grieving mother, Susan, now became the poster for the evil mother archetype who violated the sacred contract of maternal love. And it is a sacred contract. I feel, but many people seem to think that this contract is easily broken. But yet, was it really that simple? Was it as simple as her being an evil mother, or was there more things that were behind the scenes here? Now, I am going to try and put on an objective lens when I go through some of the things that I'd like to discuss when it comes to looking at this through the academic lens and the motherhood lens and the let's see two sides of the story lens. However, it's going to be difficult. So the maternal and psychological analysis. This case forces us to ask several difficult questions, not just about Susan Smith as well, but about ourselves, about the systems, about our assumptions. Let's put on our critical hats and think about this case in a different way. It shouldn't just be reduced to a bad woman or bad mother. We have to dig a little bit deeper, and we have to look what is beneath the surface. So thinking about the perfect mother stereotype, there was a portion of time where this story was almost referred to as the perfect mother gone bad sort of thing, because appearances, keeping up appearances, she appeared to be a mother that was coping. And this is an impossible standard for mothers, but society holds mothers to this impossible standard of the perfect mother myth. They must be nurturing, they have to be selfless, they have to be emotionally invulnerable, even when they're drowning, even when you feel overwhelmed. But what happens when that facade fractures? Well, Susan's story is a cautionary tale because it demonstrates what happens when there is maternal failure, when this perfect mother facade gets broken. And we rarely ask, what help did she have? Or who saw the signs and didn't do anything? For example, she was married, her and her husband were obviously broken up because there was a lot of infidelity in the marriage. They were his sons too. Did he see any of the signs? Did he try and step in and take the responsibility of the children away from her? Were there things that he could have done that would have protected his children? But also, from a small child, when Susan was a small child, her stepfather was essaying her, and essentially the mother did nothing, and it transpired into her groomer then becoming a more long-term relationship. The relationship went into her adulthood. So there's a lot of factors behind there where we can look at and say, where was the community when she was younger, and was this event inevitably going to happen because of the upbringing and the failure to support her from such a young age? So there's that theory that we can think of as well. And then there can be some reference to the feminist theory and the motherhood ideology. Now, let's talk feminist theory, particularly the concept of the ideology of intensive mothering, which idealizes motherhood as natural. I have looked at quite a few cases where there is filicide, and it can be argued that maternal instinct doesn't really seem to come naturally to everybody. But there's this ideology that motherhood is natural, fulfilling, and selfless and self-sacrificing. But here we see Susan, she didn't just violate the societal norms, she violated the sacred ideal of motherhood being natural, selfless, and fulfilling, if especially she did this to her children because she wanted to be with the man that didn't want to have kids. And the backlash to that, because of the ideals that society puts on motherhood, was swift and brutal. A 2.5 hour deliberation to come back with a yes, she's a evil woman and she deserves to rot. Fair enough, they didn't give her the death penalty, because actually we could argue that's really what she deserved. However, it was still a very, very quick comeback. They deliberated in such a short period of time, and straight away it was life with no parole. She doesn't deserve to be living amongst the general population, the general public. So because she violated those sacred norms and those sacred ideals, this was the backlash of her actions. And we often see in media and in courtrooms, especially when the media is in the courtroom, the mad versus bad, this kind of binary applied to a woman, or applied to women who unalive their children. The Andrea Yates, the Tiandra Chisholms, were they insane? Because some of them were found. I mean, Andrea Yates wasn't even convicted. She was convicted at first, and then she was allowed to plead not guilty, and she got that not guilty by reason of insanity. Tiandra Chisholm wasn't even convicted of unaliving. She was convicted of, tampering with a corpse, because they couldn't prove that she had unalived her child. So we see that there is the mad versus bad, but there's not always the outcome to these scenarios, because they are insane. How can you be normal if you do unalive your child? So were they insane, or were they just evil? This dichotomy oversimplifies complex cases and ignores the structural conditions, like the untreated traumas, the gendered expectations, the lack of support, and all of that. It ignores those conditions that shape a woman's life. There are two people that created these two young boys, but the focus is on the mother. Yes, the father didn't do anything wrong. He wasn't contributing to the death of his children. However, where was he in the process when she was clearly mentally struggling? She was diagnosed with a disorder, and where was the support from him when it came to taking up responsibility for their children? But because society places so much responsibility on the mother, because you have the instinct, it's normal for you to be selfless and self-sacrificing. It's normal for you to say that childhood is fulfilling. It's normal for you to put your needs above your children, meaning if a man says to you he doesn't want to have children, you have to just sacrifice your relationships and just focus on the children. The normal view of that would be, well, obviously you chose to have the children. However, when we look at the undercurrents of that, because society has placed these standards on mothers, would the situation be different if there was not this construct that forces women into feeling like they are failing because they don't feel maternal, because they don't think it's natural and fulfilling, and they don't want to sacrifice for the sake of their children? So a lot of things to think about there, and this is by no means is saying that it's okay, to do what she did because she doesn't have to naturally feel maternal. No, remember, we're looking at this through a critical lens, and criticality says we can argue that because of societal norms, she was forced into a position that created the miasma, it created the environment for this said situation. And would feminist criminology argue that Susan wasn't just a criminal? She was also a woman failed by the very institutions that were put in place to protect her, and those institutions being the family, the school, the church, the health services, even the criminal justice system, were those things that were put in place. They failed her from such a young age. So would feminist criminology argue that? Possibly. Then we have the untreated trauma. Now, we've kind of covered this a little bit, but Susan's entire life story is seeped in unresolved trauma, from unaliving attempts of herself, essay, abandonment, but yet her final decisions are judged without fully interrogating the emotional scaffolding that led her to that point. And it's not about excusing what she's done, because there are no excuses for what she's done, but it's about understanding the interplay between untreated trauma and tragedy. She was diagnosed with dependent personality disorder and major depressive disorder, both of which are associated with difficulty making decisions and an overwhelming fear of abandonment, and a pattern of attaching to others in unhealthy, self-destructive ways. Would we say her attachment to this guy was unhealthy? Well, yes, if it led to this. However, she argues and said that that wasn't the reason. But I don't know. Her many unaliving herself attempts and eventual actions might be viewed through what is the psychodynamic lens, or the psychodynamic theory, where unresolved unconscious traumas resurface in destructive behaviors. I'm not going to go into detail into that because I am not an expert in that field. However, if it's something that you're interested in, feel free to do your research and see how you can link it to this case. Then we have the media and misogyny, because the media helped to shape Susan into a villain. That is how I feel. I feel she's the villain, obviously. However, we have to look at the impact that the media had on this case. And while her actions were definitely horrific, there's a disturbing trend in how quickly we demonize women who deviate from their maternal script, essentially. We spoke already about the ideals of motherhood, and especially when it's white middle class mothers who are supposed to be better. Don't argue with me, argue in the comments, because that is the picture that is portrayed. Oh, we wouldn't have expected it from someone that looks like her. So the media studies and the racial politics behind this, we can't ignore that race played a factor in this. Susan herself accused a black man of abducting her children. She brought race into this argument, okay, and spent 9 days crying behind a screen saying that she wanted her children to be found because this black man had stolen her car with her children in it. And this triggered a racialized panic. It reinforced harmful racial stereotypes, weaponizing white womanhood, and in that way, we have been warned about this many times by many scholars before. This ties into to how the press sensationalized Susan's case and leaned heavily on the trope of the fallen white mother. Her tears and femininity initially won the public's sympathy. Her tears and the concept that a black man stole her children, and she sat there doing this for 9 long days, it won the sympathy of the public until it came out that she was actually lying. But up until that point, it was very believable what she had said, because again, she was the fallen white mother. How could this possibly happen to someone like her? It could happen to someone like her, because that's the stereotype. That's the stereotype that media has created. But then when the truth came out, that same media turned her into a monster. So they initially created this racialized panic and reinforcement of stereotypes, but then turned on her and then turned her into the monster, framing her as an aberration of what womanhood and motherhood looks like, what it should be. There are so many different academic lenses that you can look through when it comes to the case of Susan Smith. This isn't about sympathy. We have not looked at it through an academic lens to create any sympathy towards Susan Smith. It's about complexity. As academic mamas and academics, we must be brave enough to name the suffering, not just the symptoms. The symptom of Susan Smith's mental health was her unaliving her children, but what was all of the contributing factors that went on before that? What contributed to her, doing what she did? The silence doesn't protect us, it isolates us. People that kept silent and didn't say anything to her, you know, if they saw her going down, or even if she surrounded by people that were able to see, you know, the path that she was going down, that could have given her some support, or were there people that were involved in her life, like her husband, that probably should have spoken up and said maybe she needs a bit of help, or taken the children away from her. But there were things that contributed to this that potentially we could look at and say, was it avoidable? And a lot of these cases you look at and you think this was definitely avoidable. We know it's avoidable, but it's how far can we go when we talk about the avoidable nature of these cases. Was Susan a victim of her own mind, or was she just a manipulative woman who saw her children as disposable and as a barrier to her happy life with her man that didn't want her? Maybe it's neither, or maybe it's both. Maybe that's the conversation that we need to have in the comments, and I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Please do let me know down below, and let's keep this conversation going. And let's keep in mind that this is looking at these cases through an academic lens, so be critical but be kind. And as usual, if this case and this conversation resonated with you today, please subscribe for more true crime stories that go beyond the headlines. Here on True Crime and Tea, we spill the tea and we talk the truth through a critical lens, but we never forget the humanity behind it. This case was a challenging one, and if you know anyone that is suffering with any of the things discussed today, please do reach out to them and help signpost them to support if they need it. I've had a lovely time talking to you today, but until next time, I'll see you in another video. Bye.